Bioshock Infinite ditched a city under the sea for a city above the clouds in Colombia, an Edwardian floating metropolis that was racist as all hell and deteriorated into a battleground between you, the songbird, police, soldiers, ghosts, and pretty much everyone who lived in Colombia. Bet you can't guess what I'm gonna say next. Despite the fact that Bioshock Infinite has been out for almost a decade, there are things that you won't know or have spotted about the game, even if you've played it. So, I've rounded up 31 things you didn't know about Bioshock Infinite, even if you played it. And here they are. Just a quick warning, there are spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played Bioshock Infinite, be wary. Anyway, let's get going. When you arrive in Colombia, Preacher Whitting says,
"Is it someone new?"
when he meets you. Right at the beginning of Bioshock, exactly the same line is said by Rose when Jack arrives in Rapture. This is intentional, and hints this early on that Rapture and Colombia might be linked in some mysterious way. Bioshock Infinite was delayed 3 times. First, it was going to come out on October 16, 2021. Then it was changed to February 26, 2013, and then it was delayed yet again to March 26, 2013. Go to Battleship Bay and there's a reference to these 3 delays, as Elizabeth mentions that one of the Duke and Dimwit games was delayed 3 times. There's echoes of Big Daddies in a handful of enemies in Infinite, like Songbird and the Handyman. Before these 2 pitiful creatures came into existence, their precursor was a mechanical watchman who guarded the streets of Colombia at night. And, wouldn't you know it, he had a little sister-like companion in this illustration, which is eerily similar to, well, Little Sisters in Rapture. Not all the vigors, Infinite's versions of plasmids, made it to the final game. Fungal healing, kinetic overflow, spider trap, and weapon slave are vigors that we never got to wield, and I know some of you won't like the sound of spider trap, but personally, I would love to encase someone in a spider web or hundreds of tiny spiders. Love to channel my inner love.
Those are vigors I'm talking about!
Infinite has tears turning people into confused versions of themselves stuck between 2 realities, and they were going to look a lot more messed up than they ended up being in the game. Tears were going to turn civilians and those who had travelled through them into twisted, almost Picasso-like versions of themselves. Nouveau scarring is the name for this particular splicing, and yes, that is an intentional use of that word, as it sounds like these characters would have performed the same function of splicers in Bioshock. One ditched enemy class was a human who would gorge on corpses and grow into a larger, monstrous version of themselves. A particular version of this was a little girl with a cage over her head, turning into a not-so-little girl, or this large-mouthed and teethed man. I mean, you don't want to let those corpses go to waste, do you? Pay attention next time you use the Possession Vigor. Whispered seductively in the background by the Green Fairy are lines from Romeo and Juliet, played in reverse. Yeah, as in the play written by William Shakespeare. Have a listen. Elizabeth has a kind soul, so her trying to revive a horse in this beta footage is, to be honest, something a few of us would try if we had her powers. However, instead of opening up on the 1980s, the tear she creates was going to be a primeval forest. According to Ken Levine, this decision was made because he felt like it would have more of an impact on the audience if it brought into the game a time period that some players would know well. And the scene itself reused building models from a cancelled Irrational Games project.
Close it now!
Bioshock Infinite's Siren evolved from this Pope-looking guy who could manipulate dead bodies to do his bidding. To you and me, he'd be a necromancer, but in the game, he's deliberately presented as a saint or martyr with bleeding hearts carved into his palms. That's one bloody religion. Sander Cohen might not be an Infinite himself, but there was going to be an enemy inspired by him. It was this magician figure who used telekinesis and created minions to fight for them, and considering Cohen's flourish for showmanship, I'm sure he would have approved.
Is that right?
Looking into the distance when you're at the lighthouse reveals small pinpricks of light, meant to be buildings lit up in the dark. Fans have zoomed into them to reveal that these are actually not buildings at all, but cardboard cutouts from Soldiers Field, heavy with yellow saturation to simulate far-off lights. In Battleship Bay, Booker was going to wake up all alone on the beach without Elizabeth anywhere to be seen. But during playtesting, players were upset that Elizabeth had run off, as by then they had formed quite a strong bond with her, and took it a bit hard that she left Booker without any care for his welfare. So, to show that Elizabeth does care for Booker after he saved her from Monument Island, the developers added a scene where Elizabeth is worried about Booker, but he groggily gives her permission to go and explore.
Go on,
Okay, I won't be long. I won't be long, Mr. DeWitt.
The Handyman started off as this claw daddy, yep, that's its real name, don't kink shame, who would use its claws to rip people apart. Sebastian would be so disappointed.
For the celebration.
Precisely which method Booker would use to imbibe vigors were floated around, and before the glugging bottles was decided upon, one of these ideas was a hummingbird-type bottle, or an insect design with a mosquito-like appendage that would plug into your hand. Given the choice between a hummingbird and a mosquito, I think I know which one most of us would go for. Most of Bioshock's protagonists always have something up with their hands. Jack had his chains, Subject Delta had a Delta mark, and Subject Sigma had a Sigma mark. Booker is no different, with his AD brand, standing for Anna DeWitt, continuing the line of protagonists having marked hands. Another enemy that was scrapped was the Enhancer enemy type. Wrapped up in coats and scarves, he would have supported other enemies by buffing them at a distance with instant acting potions that he presumably doesn't want to get on himself, hence all those suffocating layers. A mad toy maker was on the cards at one point, and they had some creations that wouldn't look out of place in a circus. These owl, rabbit, elephant, and moth heavies would have been their protectors, and you can kind of see the songbird in the Mothman concept with its wings. See, the developers knew that there needed to be a flying enemy in Columbia with all its floating buildings, and the Mothman is the first hint that they were thinking of what these enemies might look like. These flying enemies gradually evolved from a Mothman to a shrouded Big Daddy-like creature, to an astronaut, to a manticore, and finally a lion gargoyle-like creature that would eventually become the songbird. Elizabeth was going to be older and much less naive in earlier versions of the game, at one point being princess-like and aloof, presumably affected by being spoken of as the saviour as Columbia for her entire life. When it came to her look, the dress went through big changes too, with comic book costumes and their bold designs and colours being a big inspiration, as Elizabeth had to be recognisable from a distance. Her eyes are much bigger than other characters too, with their exaggerated proportions being necessary so you could read her expressions from afar and know instantly how she was feeling during tense action scenes. Fink is not an ethical businessman, so it should come as no surprise that there were plans for biomachines, aka humans, physically attached to machines, kind of like the Handyman, to be part of his factories. Before the motorised Patriot was George Washington with a minigun, it was going to be a lot more docile, but just as damaging, though in a more mental way. Let me explain. The motorised Patriot was going to be a motorised propagandist that would roll around, spouting Columbia propaganda to the masses. On the First Lady airship, Elizabeth uses a red wrench to knock Booker out and take control of the airship. When I say it like that, it's kind of obvious what's coming next. That wrench that Elizabeth uses is a reference to the wrench used by Jack in the first Bioshock.
I want to see everything.
The Boys of Silence are creepy already in Bioshock Infinite, and they had an extra string to their bow in the original design. These cursed boys were going to recycle sounds and use them as a weapon, meaning that they'd collect the sounds you'd make as Booker, like footsteps and gunshots, and then use them against you in, I presume, sonic attacks. The idea was that the recycling technique was meant to encourage the player to use quieter weapons, like melee weapons or silenced guns, but in the end, this didn't come to pass. Instead of being between the racist Columbia authorities and the Vox Populi, the war in the first drafts of the plot for Bioshock Infinite would have been between tech geeks and Luddites, aka between those who liked technology and wanted to see it used in day-to-day life, and those who didn't like technology and wanted to go back to simpler times, called Luddites. The Hall of Heroes was once a tunnel of love ride. Aww.
Life would still go on, believe me.
In an early gameplay demo, the engine Bioshock Infinite was running on allowed buildings to float on their own and be affected by the game's dynamic weather conditions. This entire scene was unscripted, being produced by a combination of the game's physics engine and the dynamic weather system. And no, you haven't somehow overlooked this major feature during your time with Bioshock Infinite. Bioshock Infinite didn't get shipped with this dynamic weather system in the end. Kind of a pity, if you ask me. Veni, Vidi, Vigor is the name of the Vigor vending machines in Bioshock Infinite. History buffs among you may have suspected this next fact already. This name is a play on Caesar's famous phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici, which translates to, I came, I saw, I conquered.
There's one!
Shoot him! Quiet!
The last words gasped by Comstock are the same as the last words allegedly said by Jesus.
It is finished.
Elizabeth was going to be just 17 years old when you first met her, but after seeing her this young, she came across as quote-unquote, too Disney princess. And, just in case that wasn't evidence enough that Elizabeth felt a bit too Disney-like, a handful of her scripted animations had to be removed, as they were too similar to Rapunzel from Disney's Tangled. When developers had to create and test animations, they did it in Battleship Bay, of all places. Keep a close eye on Elizabeth during your time in Battleship Bay, and you'll see that she has loads of different animations that only occur there, from skipping stones to dancing. As all of these animations were first tested here, they were kept here too. There are around 200 animations that Elizabeth can do in Battleship Bay. I wonder how long it would take to find them all.
There you go, little miss. Grand candy here.
Ever wondered why there's a Greek soldier on the return to sender vigor? That's because the bottle is based off of a Greek hoplite. Hoplites were famous for fighting in a kind of overlapping style, by standing in line and holding their shields to the side to protect the next person in the row. So, the shape of the bottle is a shield, which alludes to the hoplites and the fact that it lets you protect yourself from damage. And that's 31 things you didn't know about Bioshock Infinite, even if you played it. If you enjoyed the video, thanks very much, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Eurogamer for more videos about video games, as we have a new one out every single day. You can also follow us on Instagram at Team Eurogamer, where you'll get daily updates about videos we have coming out, when we're doing live streams and glimpses behind the scenes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go, so remember to stay hydrated, folks, and I'll see you next time.